A pleasant day to everyone. I'm John Forcenas, and I'm with my co-reporters, Ira May Chaure, Angel Bill Nacional, and Chareluz Navida. We will discuss today is all about the behavioral learning theories, and before uh, before we start, I just like to share a short summary or a short brief to our report. Behavioral learning theories are a set of theories that attempt to explain how humans and animals learn and modify their behavior through the environment. And these theories can focus on the relationship between behavior and environmental stimuli and suggest that behavior is shaped by the consequences of that behavior. Behavioral learning theories are important for understanding how people acquire new skills, knowledge, and attitudes and how this can be modified over time. There are several different types of behavioral learning theories, including classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and social learning theory. Classical conditioning, discovered by Ivan Pavlov, is the process by which a neutral stimulus comes to elicit a response after being paired with a stimulus that already elicits that response. Operant conditioning, discovered by B.F. Skinner, is the process by which behavior is modified by its consequences with positive consequences, increasing the likelihood of behavior, and negative consequences, decreasing the likelihood of behavior. Social learning theory, developed by Albert Bandura, emphasized the importance of observational learning and modeling in the acquisition of new behaviors. In this report, we will explore the key principles and concepts of behavioral learning theories and examine their relevance and application in various settings, such as education, workplace, training, and therapy. We will also discuss the strengths and limitations of these theories and examine how they have been further developed and refined in more recent research. Overall, these reports aim to provide a comprehensive overview of behavioral learning theories and their implication for understanding human behavior and learning. Give me a child and I will shape him into anything by B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner, he believed that the behavior is primarily shaped by the environmental factors, particularly the consequences that follow a particular behavior. He developed the concept of operant conditioning, which actually involves reinforcing desired behaviors and punishing undesired behaviors. In that context, the phrase "Give me a child and I will shape him into anything." Skinner believed that by carefully controlling an individual's environment and providing appropriate reinforcement, he could create a specific set of behavior in the individual. These ideas is based on the principle of operant conditioning, which holds the behavior is determined by its consequences. In essence, Skinner was suggesting that through the use of his theories and techniques, he could mold an individual behavior in any desired direction. However, it's worth noting that this approach has been criticized for potentially ignoring individual differences and the complexity of human behavior. So we will stop here because one of us reporters will discuss about B.F. Skinner. Now, who is Ivan Pavlov? I'll give you a short brief about Ivan Pavlov. Ivan Pavlov was a Russian psychology who is best known for his work in the field of classical conditioning. Pavlov is famous for his experiments with dogs, in which he discovered the phenomenon of classical conditioning. He noticed that dogs would begin to salivate at the sounds of a bell that had been repeatedly paired with the presentation of food. This led him to develop the concept of conditioned reflexes, which states that a previously neutral stimulus can become associated with a natural reflex response through repeated pairing. Pavlov's works had a significant impact on the field of psychology and helped lay the groundwork for behaviorism. Was awarded the Nobel Prize in Psychology or Medical in 1904 for his contribution to the understanding of digestions. Now we have here the Pavlov conditioning in a nutshell. So this is the process of classical conditioning. First, before conditioning. In the beginning, the neutral stimulus, or such as the sound of a bell, does not elicit a response such as salivation from the organism, such as a dog. While during the conditioning, the neutral stimulus is presented just before the meaning stimulus, such as food, that naturally elicits the response. After a repeated pairing or of the two stimuli, the neutral stimulus alone starts to elicit the response. Now, the after conditioning, the neutral stimulus now became conditioned stimulus, or CS, that elicit the same response as the original meaningful stimulus or unconditioned stimulus, or US. The response is called the conditioned response, CR. It is the Pavlov famous experiment involves ringing a bell or neutral stimulus just before giving dogs food, or meaningful stimulus would naturally cause them to salivate or respond over time. The dog learned to associate the sounds of the bell with the range of foods, and eventually the sound of the bell alone would cause them to salivate. In summary, Pavlov conditioning is a process by which an organism learns to associate a neutral stimulus with a meaningful stimulus that naturally elicits a response, resulting in the neutral stimulus itself coming to elicit the response. So that's what the process of classical conditioning, no, by Pavlov. So we have here other phenomena in classical conditioning. Now, first is discrimination. Discrimination. This is a phenomenon when the subjects reacts differently to other stimuli. Stimulus discrimination occurs when an organism learns to respond differently to similar stimuli based on their association with different outcomes. For example, let's say a dog has been conditioned to salivate in response to a specific tone that is always followed by the presentation of food. If the same tone is played at a slightly different pitch or volume, the dog may not respond because it has learned to discriminate between the specific tone and predicts food, no, and other similar tones that do not. In another example, if a person has been conditioned to fear a specific type of snake, they may exhibit fear responses, no, such as sweating and increased heart rate, no, when they encounter that we encountered that specific snakes, but not when they encounter a different, less similar snake. Stimulus discrimination is is an important aspect of learning and helps organisms to respond appropriately to different stimuli in their environment. It also helps to prevent overgeneralizations of responses where an organism responds to the same way to all similar stimuli, even if they are not relevant or important. So next is the extinction. The extinction is the learning passes through time. So learning is a process that can occur over time as an organism acquires new information, skills, or behaviors through experience. There are several different types of learning that can occur over different time scales, depending on the nature of the learning task and the organism's abilities and environment. One type of learning that occurs over time is associate learning, such as classical and operant conditioning. In this form of learning, an organism forms associations between stimuli or responses and outcomes which can lead to changes in behavior over time. For an example, in classical conditioning, an organism learns to associate a neutral stimulus with a meaningful stimulus through repeated pairings, no? And which can result in a conditioned response that persists over time. And another type of learning that occurs over time is observational learning, where an organism learns by observing the behavior of others. This type of learning can occur over a longer time scale, as the observer may need to observe multiple instances of the behavior in order to learn it themselves. Learning can also occur over a longer time scales through processes such as memory consolidations and long-term potentiation, no, are known as LTP, which are mechanisms by which the brain encodes and strengthens memories over time. This process can allow an organisms to retain and recall learned information over long periods of time, potentially for the rest of their life. In summary, learning can occur over time through various processes and mechanisms, allowing an organism to acquire new information, skill, and behaviors that can persist over different time scales, depending on the nature of the learning task and the organism's abilities and environment. The third one is the spontaneous recovery. This recovery after extinction phenomenon is the reappearance of a previously extinguished condition response following a rest period or exposure to a similar context. For example, na dyan, a previous conditioned fear response to a tone may re-emerge after a rest period even though the tone is no longer associated with a fearful outcome. Overall, the recovery after extinction phenomenon is a complex process that highlights the importance of context and memory in the formation, extinction, and reactivation of conditioned responses. And the last one is generalization. More the new stimulus to the CS, the lesser generalization surface. In classical conditioning, a conditioned stimulus, or CS, is a previously neutral stimulus that after being paired with an unconditioned stimulus, or UCS, elicits a conditioned response, or CR. The process of conditioning involves the gradual association between the CS and the UCS so that the CS comes to evoke a similar response as the UCS. One important aspect of classical conditioning is generalization, which refers to the tendency of a learning response to occur not only to the original CS but also to other stimuli that are similar to the CS. For example, if a dog has a learned to salivate to a particular tone, it may also salivate to a similar tone that are slightly higher or lower in frequency. However, the degree of generalization depends on the similarity between the original CS and the other stimuli. If the other stimuli are very different from the original CS, the generalization will be weaker. On the other hand, if the other stimuli are very similar to the original CS, the generalization will be stronger. Therefore, if a new stimulus is introduced that is very different from the original CS, the generalization surface will be reduced. This means that the learned response will be less likely to occur to other similar stimuli and more likely to be specific to the original CS. This can be useful in certain contexts, such as in treating phobias or other anxieties disorder, where the goal is to reduce the generalization of fear to similar stimuli. Overall, the degree of generalization in classical conditioning depends on the similarity between the original CS and other stimuli, and introducing a new stimulus that is very different from the original CS can reduce the generalization surface and make the learned response more specific to the original CS. Now let's move on to another conditioning, which is Watson conditioning. So, who is John Broadus Watson? John B. Watson was an American psychologist who is often referred to as the father of behaviorism. Watson's most famous work is his 1930 paper, Psychology as the Behaviorist Views It, in which he argued that psychology should only concern itself with observable behavior and not with subjective experiences or mental process. He believed that behavior could be studied objectively through experiments, and that behavior could be controlled and modified through conditioning techniques. Watson is also known for his controversial title of The Little Albert Experiment, in which he conditioned a young child to fear a white rat by pairing the rat with loud noise. This experiment demonstrated the power of classical conditioning and potential for behavior modification through environmental manipulation. Overall, Watson's work helped to establish behaviorism as a dominant approach in psychology during the early part of the 20th century, and his ideas continues to influence contemporary research in psychology and related fields. Watsonian conditioning is another term of classical conditioning, which is a type of learning in which an organism learns to associate two stimuli and responds to a previously neutral stimulus in a way that is similar to the way it responds to the original, meaningful stimulus. Classical conditioning was first described by the Russian psychologist Ivan Pavlov, but it was popularized and expanded upon by American psychologist John B. Watson, who was one of the founders of behaviorism. Watson believed that behavior could be explained by observable and measurable factors, and that classical conditioning was a key mechanism by which organisms learned to respond to environmental stimuli. In classical conditioning, an organism learns to associate a neutral stimulus, the conditioned stimulus or CS, with a biological significant stimulus, the unconditioned stimulus or US, that naturally elicits a response, the unconditioned response or UR. Through repeated pairing of the CS and US, the organism learns to respond to the CS in a way that is similar to the way it responds to the US, even in the absence of the US. For example, in Pavlov's classical experiment, a dog learned to associate the sounds of a bell CS with the presentation of food US, which naturally caused dog to salivate UR after several pairing of the bell and the food. The dog began to salivate in response to the sounds of the bell alone. Now the conditioned stimuli are CS even when the food was not present. Overall, classical conditioning is an important process that underlies many aspects of learning and behavior, and it has important implications for fields such as psychology, education, and animal training. So that's all for the Pavlovian conditioning and Watsonian conditioning. The next reporter will be Angel Bell National, and will discuss about Thorndike connectionism.
Good day everyone, I am Angel Bell National and I will discuss the lesson 2, which is Thorndike connectionism. First, I will give you a short introduction about Thorndike. Thorndike, or Edward Lee Thorndike, an American psychologist who spent nearly his entire career at Teachers College in Columbia University. His work on comparative psychology and the learning process lead to the theory of connectionism. Second, I will discuss the definition of connectionism. Connectionism is a learning theory represents the original SR framework or behavioral psychology. Learning is the result of associations forming stimuli and response. Such associations o mga gawin natin ay nagiging kalakasan o kahinaan natin. In this theory of stimuli and response was the trial and error learning kung saan ay ilang mga tugon or response comes to us upang mangibabaw sa iba dahil sa rewards. For example, a cat learning to escape from a puzzle box by pressing a lever inside the box. After much trial and error behavior, the cat learns to associate pressing the lever with opening the door.
Law of exercise. It means that drill or practices help in increasing efficiency and durability of learning. And according to Thorndike's SR bond theory, the connections are strengthened with trial or practice, and the connections are weakened when trial or practice are discontinued. It also understood as the law of use and disuse, in which case connections made in the brain cortex are weakened or loosened. Example of this case are found in case of human learning to drive a motor car, typewriting, singing, or memorizing a poem. It needs an exercise and repetition of various movements and action many times. Another example is a small child learns some skills through trial and error method only such as sitting, standing, walking, and so on. In teachings also the child rectifies the writing after committing mistakes. Law of effect. According to this law, the trial or steps leading to satisfaction stumps in the bond or connections. Satisfying states lead to consolidation and strengthening of the connection, whereas dissatisfaction, annoyance, or pain lead to the weakening or stopping out of the connection. In fact, the law of effects signifies that if the response satisfies the subject, they are learned and selected, while those which are not satisfying are eliminated. Teaching, therefore, must be pleasing. In this law, more emphasis has been laid on motivation. Thus, before starting teaching in the classroom, the students should be properly motivated. Next is law of readiness. It means that learning takes place when an action's tendency is aroused through preparatory adjustment, set, or attitude. Readiness means the preparation of action. If one is not prepared to learn, learning cannot be automatically instilled in him or her. In short, this law thus can be started from the easier aspects towards its difficult side. This approach will benefit the weaker and backward children. For example, unless the typist, in order to learn typing, prepares himself to start, he would not make much progress in a lethargic and unprepared manner. Next slide is principle of associated shifting. It is a learning principle that states that ideas and experiences reinforce each other and can be mentally linked to one another. Here are examples of associative shifting: word association, learning and memory, advertising, prejudice, and stereotyping.
That's all for this lesson 2. The next reporter will be Charilis Nabita. She will discuss the lesson 3, which is Skinner's operant conditioning.
A pleasant day to everyone. I'm Charles Navida and I will discuss the lesson 3, entitled Skinner's operant conditioning. Operant conditioning, also known as instrumental conditioning, is a method of learning normally attributed to B.F. Skinner, where the consequences of a response determine the probability of it being repeated. Through operant conditioning, behavior which is reinforced will likely be repeated, and behavior which is punished will occur less frequently.
So we can see in the picture how illustration made by Skinner. In 1948, Skinner studied operant conditioning by conducting experiments using animals which he placed in a Skinner box. What is a Skinner box? A Skinner box, also known as an operant conditioning chamber, is a device to use to objectively record an animal's behavior in a compressed time frame. An animal can be rewarded or punished for engaging in a certain behaviors, such as level pressing or key pecking.
Let's move to the reinforcement. Reinforcement, Skinner's operant condition, is dichotomized into reinforcement and punishment. Each category is also divided into positive and negative. What is positive reinforcement? Positive reinforcement is a term described by B.F. Skinner in his theory of operant conditioning. In positive reinforcement, a response or behavior is strengthened by rewards, leading to the repetition of desired behavior, and the reward is reinforcing stimulus. Skinner showed how positive reinforcement worked by placing a hungry rat in his Skinner box. The box contained a lever on the side, and the rat moved about the box. It would accidentally knock the lever. Immediately, if it did so that a food would drop into a container next to the lever. Next one is negative reinforcement. This is known as negative reinforcement because it is the removal of an adverse stimulus, which is rewarding, to the animal or person. Negative reinforcement strengthens behavior because it stops or removes an unpleasant experience. Again, positive reinforcement as the addition of a pleasant stimulus. The dispensed food became a positive reinforcement that caused the rat to continually push the lever. And negative reinforcement, it is taking away an unpleasant consequence to cause the behavior to happen again. A pleasant day to everyone. I'm Charles Navida and I will discuss the lesson 3 entitled Skinner's Operant Conditioning. Operant conditioning, also known as instrumental conditioning, is a method of learning normally attributed to B.F. Skinner, where the consequences of a response determine the probability of it being repeated. Through operant conditioning, behavior which is reinforced will likely be repeated, and behavior which is punished will occur less frequently.
So we can see in the picture how illustration made by Skinner. In 1948, Skinner studied operant conditioning by conducting experiments using animals which he placed in a Skinner box. What is a Skinner box? A Skinner box, also known as an operant conditioning chamber, is a device to use to objectively record an animal's behavior in a compressed time frame. An animal can be rewarded or punished for engaging in a certain behaviors, such as level pressing or key pecking.
Let's move to the reinforcement. Reinforcement, Skinner's operant condition, is dichotomized into reinforcement and punishment. Each category is also divided into positive and negative. What is positive reinforcement? Positive reinforcement is a term described by B.F. Skinner in his theory of operant conditioning. In positive reinforcement, a response or behavior is strengthened by rewards, leading to the repetition of desired behavior, and the reward is reinforcing stimulus. Skinner showed how positive reinforcement worked by placing a hungry rat in his Skinner box. The box contained a lever on the side, and the rat moved about the box. It would accidentally knock the lever. Immediately, if it did so that a food would drop into a container next to the lever. Next one is negative reinforcement. This is known as negative reinforcement because it is the removal of an adverse stimulus, which is rewarding to the animal or person. Negative reinforcement strengthens behavior because it stops or removes an unpleasant experience. Again, positive reinforcement as the addition of a pleasant stimulus. The dispensed food became a positive reinforcement that caused the rat to continually push the lever. And negative reinforcement, it is taking away an unpleasant consequence to cause the behavior to happen again. Next, schedules of reinforcement. Schedules of reinforcement play important role in operant conditioning, which is a learning process in which new behaviors are acquired and modified through their association with consequences. Reinforcing a behavior increases the likelihood it will occur again in the future, while punishing a behavior decreases the likelihood that it will be repeated. Continuous schedule are most effective when trying to teach a new behavior. This schedule denotes a pattern in which every narrowly defined response is followed by a narrowly defined consequence. Intermittent schedule. Reinforcement is given irregularly as the animal gives the desired response. There are four schedules of partial reinforcement. Two are interval schedules or base how much time has elapsed. The other two are ratio schedules, which are schedules has base how many responses have occurred. Fixed interval are those where the first response is rewarded only after a specified amount of time has elapsed. Variable interval occur when a response is rewarded after an unpredictable amount of time has elapsed. Fixed ratio are those in which a response is reinforced only after a specified number of responses. And variable ratio occur when a response is reinforced after an unpredictable number of responses. Operant conditioning also includes punishment, whose main aim is to weaken the response. However, punishment does not necessarily eliminate the behavior. When the threat of punishment is removed, the punishment response may recur. Skinner believed that positive punishment is an addition of an unpleasant stimulus to decrease the behavior, and negative punishment, meanwhile, is the removal of rewarding stimulus to decrease the behavior.
Operant conditioning can be a powerful learning tool. The schedules of reinforcement used during the training and maintenance process can have a major influence on how quickly a behavior is acquired, the strength of the response, and how frequently the behavior is displayed. In order to determine which schedule is preferable, consider different aspects of the situations, including the type of behavior that is being thought and the type of response that is desired. Now that's all for this slide. The next reporter will be Irami Ichare. She will discuss about the neo-behaviorism.
Good day everyone, I'm Ichaura Airame and we will talk about Tolman's purposive behaviorism. In Tolman's purposive behaviorism, behavior implied a performance, the achievement of an altered relationship between the organism and its environment. Behavior was functional and pragmatic. Behavior involved motivation and cognition. Behavior revealed purpose. In Tolman's purposive behaviorism, ang learning daw ay purposive. It is goal-directed. May purpose kung bakit tayo nag-aaral, bakit ganito ang pag-uugali natin o behavior natin, o yung mga ginagawa natin. It's because we have goals and that is purposive learning theory. And now, I am going to discuss about latent learning and cognitive map. Latent learning is a form of learning that occurs without any visible reinforcement of the behavior associations that are learned. Kapag sinabi nating latent learning, ito yung alam mo pero nakatago lang, hindi nakikita o na-observe, kumbaga nakatago lang to. Lalabas lang yung alam mo kapag kailangan. Halimbawa, sa first aid, may nasugat sa mga kasama mo. Yung mga kaibigan mo, nakikita mo na hindi nila alam kung paano mag-first aid. Pero nagulat ka na mayroon ka palang kaibigan na alam kung paano mag-first aid. Ibig sabihin, ito na yung tinatawag nating latent learning. May alam siya na hindi mo alam kasi nakatago lang. So yung kaalaman na yun, nakaremain lang siya. And lalabas siya kapag kailangan. And that is a latent learning. The next one is cognitive map. So what is cognitive map? It is a mental illustrations of the layout of the environment. Halimbawa nito, sina Jay at Kate ay dalawang matalik na magkaibigan. Dahil nakatira sila sa magkaibang bayan, hindi na sila madalas bumisita sa isa't isa gaya ng dati. Birthday ngayon ni Jay. Nagpa siya si Kate na bisitahin si Jay. Nang dumating siya sa bayan, tinawagan ni Kate si Jay para tanungin yung direksyon papunta sa bahay nila Jay. At sinabi ni Jay ang eksaktong daan papunta sa bahay nila. Hindi na kailangan ni Kate na tumingin pa sa mapa o gumamit pa ng ibang tulong para magbigay ng direksyon papunta sa bahay nila Jay. Because the cognitive map is how we know where we are. Toulmin's purpose-salient principles. Behavior is always purposive. By this, he meant that all behavior is ignited to accomplish a specific goal. In its purest sense, a demonstration of learning is the outcome of possessing a purpose to show it. Behavior is cognitive. The expectations that underlie and guide behavior are cognitions. Reinforcement establishes and confirms expectances. As previously stated, learning according to Toulmin deals with connections between stimuli and expectances of or perceptions, representations, needs, and other interviewing variables. He believed individuals do more than merely respond to stimuli, they act on beliefs, attitudes, changing conditions, and they strive towards goals. And now, let us study the components of successful modeling. The first one is attention, the second one is retention, and the third one is production, and the last one is motivation. Okay, let's have an example. Paano natutong gumamit ng makeup yung isang bata? Habang nanonood sa TikTok yung isang bata, may nakita siyang influencer na nagme-makeup. Nakita ito ng bata, so nagkaroon ng attention or awareness dun sa ginawa ng influencer. Then next is retention or the remembering behavior. E di yung bata, natandaan niya kung paano yung ginagawa ng influencer. And then next, yung production or ibig sabihin, ability to replicate. Di ba minsan nakikita natin yung mga bata na kunwari nakatingin sa salamin tas ginagaya yung mga nakikita nila. Katulad nung nakita ng bata sa influencer. Ginagaya nito ng paunti-unti kung paano yung pagme-makeup ng influencer. Then the last is motivation or will to emulate the behavior. So yung bata pumunta sa kwarto ng mami niya. And nakita niya doon yung mga makeup kit. At yun, nagkaroon siya ng motivation na gawin yung ginawa ng influencer. At ito yung tinatawag nating condition for affective modeling. Natututo yung bata kung ano yung nakikita niya sa paligid niya o yung mga naoobserbahan niya. Natututo ang isang bata.
Reminder po sa mga mag-take po ng quiz sa amin. Pwede po bang i-sync nyo muna or i-back up nyo muna po yung mga sagot nyo bago nyo i-next or i-next page, no? Kasi po hindi po nag-upload or hindi po nag-update yung mga ganun. Maraming salamat po. That's all our topic that we discussed today. We are thankful that you listen here and God bless. Thank you again.